Is your heart heavy and weary? Listen to Psalm 23 and let God bring peace to your life. Prayer at any time, when the heart becomes too heavy to carry. There are moments in life when the heart grows tired in a way that sleep cannot fix. The body may lie down, the eyes may close, yet the mind continues moving as if it refuses to rest. Thoughts circle the same worries again and again. Questions about tomorrow rise without warning. Concerns about the future grow louder in the quiet hours. You try to remain strong. You try to hold everything together. You tell yourself that you just need to manage a little longer. Yet somewhere deep inside, a silent weight begins to grow. Many people live this way without ever speaking about it. They move through their daily routines. They talk with coworkers. They answer messages. They smile when necessary. From the outside, everything appears normal, perhaps even successful. But inside the mind, something very different is happening. A storm keeps moving beneath the surface. Responsibilities pile up. Decisions feel heavier than they used to. Small worries slowly multiply into larger fears. The mind begins imagining outcomes that have not even happened yet. The strange part is that anxiety rarely arrives all at once. It builds slowly. One concern adds itself to another. A responsibility here, an uncertainty there, a memory of something that went wrong in the past, a fear that something important might fall apart in the future. Little by little, the heart becomes crowded with invisible burdens. And because these burdens cannot be seen, many people carry them alone. Perhaps you recognize this feeling. The moment when your heart becomes heavy and your thoughts refuse to rest. The moment when night arrives but peace does not follow. Silence fills the room. Yet the mind becomes louder than the world outside. Questions begin to rise quietly inside your thoughts. What if things do not work out? What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot hold everything together? In moments like these, the mind begins searching for control. It tries to predict every possible outcome. It replays conversations. It analyzes situations again and again, hoping that thinking harder might somehow create certainty. Yet the more the mind tries to control everything, the more tired the heart becomes. Instead of bringing peace, the effort to manage every possible future begins to drain the soul. There is a reason for this. The human heart was never designed to carry the entire weight of life alone. Yet many people unknowingly attempt to do exactly that. They try to control every situation. They try to prevent every mistake. They try to prepare for every possible difficulty. The pressure grows quietly until one day they realize that the search for control has stolen their sense of peace. But there is a different path. Across centuries, during wars, uncertainty, loss, and hardship, countless people have turned to a small passage of Scripture when their hearts became overwhelmed. These words have been whispered in hospital rooms, spoken in quiet prayers during sleepless nights, and remembered by those walking through seasons of fear. The words come from Psalm 23. Psalm 23 was written in a world that was far from peaceful. Danger existed. Uncertainty surrounded daily life. Yet within that reality, these words offered something powerful. Not an escape from life's valleys, but a way to walk through them with confidence. Psalm 23 speaks to a truth that anxious hearts often forget. Peace does not come from controlling every circumstance. Peace comes from trusting the one who guides our path through every circumstance. The psalm begins with a simple but profound declaration. The Lord is my shepherd. These words change everything about how life is understood. A shepherd guides. A shepherd protects. A shepherd watches over the path even when the sheep cannot see beyond the next hill. The image reveals something that many anxious minds struggle to accept. You are not walking through life alone. If your heart feels heavy today, pause for a moment and allow yourself to breathe. Let your thoughts slow down. Let the pressure of control loosen its grip on your mind. Because the words you are about to hear were written for moments exactly like this. And as we begin reflecting on Psalm 23 together, Something quiet may begin to happen within your heart. The storm of thoughts may start to calm. The weight you have been carrying may begin to feel lighter. Not because every problem disappears, but because you begin to remember a truth that changes how every problem is faced. The shepherd is already walking with you. The quiet weight no one sees. There are burdens that no one around you can see. They do not appear in conversations, they are not written on your face, and they rarely become part of what you share with others. Yet they are real, and they grow quietly inside the heart. Many people carry this weight every day. They wake up, go through their routines, fulfill responsibilities, and continue moving forward while something inside them feels increasingly heavy. It often begins with small concerns, a responsibility that feels larger than expected, a decision that seems difficult to make, a situation that refuses to resolve itself. At first, these thoughts appear manageable. The mind tells itself that everything will eventually fall into place. But as days pass, the same concerns return again and again. The mind begins to revisit them in quiet moments, during a pause in the day, during the drive home, in the stillness of the night. The strange thing about emotional burdens is that they rarely arrive loudly. They grow through repetition. A thought repeated often enough begins to feel like reality. A fear imagined long enough begins to feel inevitable. The mind starts building scenarios about tomorrow, about what might go wrong, about what might fall apart. And slowly, without realizing it, the heart begins carrying more than it was ever meant to carry. Many people believe that strength means handling everything alone. They believe that if they remain silent about their worries, they are being responsible. They continue showing up for others. They keep solving problems. They continue moving forward because stopping feels like failure. Yet inside, a different story is unfolding. The mind becomes crowded. The heart becomes tired. Even moments of rest feel incomplete because the thoughts never fully leave. Perhaps you know this feeling, the quiet pressure that sits behind your thoughts, the way concerns follow you even when nothing urgent is happening, the sense that your mind is always working, always anticipating the next difficulty. Over time, this invisible tension begins to affect how life feels. Moments that should bring peace feel shorter. Joy becomes harder to hold on to. Even when things appear calm, the mind keeps searching for the next problem to solve. What makes this burden even heavier is the belief that you must carry it alone. Many people convince themselves that no one else would understand their worries. They believe that sharing their struggles would somehow make them appear weak, so they keep everything inside. The world continues to see the strong version of them, while the quiet exhaustion remains hidden beneath the surface. Yet the truth is that this quiet weight is not a personal failure. It is part of the human condition. Every person at some point faces moments when life feels larger than their ability to manage it. The difference lies not in whether burdens appear, but in how those burdens are carried. Some try to carry everything themselves. Others eventually discover that there is a different way. The moment a person begins to acknowledge the weight they have been carrying, something important happens. The heart becomes honest. The mind begins to question whether control is truly the answer. And this honesty opens the door to a deeper realization. The struggle to hold everything together may be the very thing that is creating the exhaustion. And once that realization begins to settle into the heart, another question naturally appears. What if peace does not come from holding tighter to life, but from learning how to release what was never yours to control? When control becomes a prison. There is a moment when the mind begins to believe that peace will only come when everything is finally under control. When the problems are solved, when the future becomes predictable, when every uncertainty disappears. The heart quietly creates a condition for rest. I will relax when things settle down. I will feel peace when life becomes stable. I will breathe when tomorrow finally makes sense. But life rarely obeys that condition. Instead, something unexpected begins to happen. The more the mind tries to control everything, the more restless it becomes. It begins to analyze every situation, replay every conversation, imagine every possible outcome. Thoughts become strategies. Worries disguise themselves as preparation. The mind convinces itself that if it thinks long enough, it will eventually find the solution that prevents every possible problem. Yet this constant effort creates something invisible but powerful. Control slowly becomes a prison. The mind wakes up already searching for what might go wrong. Even peaceful moments become temporary because the thoughts quickly move ahead to the next concern. Instead of living the present moment, the heart becomes trapped in a continuous negotiation with the future. It tries to anticipate what cannot yet be seen. It tries to manage events that have not yet happened. This is where anxiety quietly grows. The human mind was never designed to carry the responsibility of controlling life itself. Yet many people unknowingly accept that responsibility. They feel that if they relax, something might fall apart. If they stop worrying, they might miss a warning sign. If they release control, life might move in a direction they cannot manage. So they hold tighter. They hold tighter to plans. They hold tighter to expectations. They hold tighter to outcomes they believe must happen in order for life to feel safe. And with every attempt to tighten their grip on life, the tension inside the heart grows stronger. What often goes unnoticed is that the search for control creates a deeper form of exhaustion. The mind becomes responsible for too many things at once. It tries to predict the future, protect the present, and correct the past. It carries the impossible task of managing what only God can truly oversee. This is why many people reach a point where they feel mentally drained even when nothing dramatic has happened. The exhaustion does not come from a single event. It comes from the continuous effort to hold the entire structure of life together by personal strength. But there is a quiet truth hidden beneath this struggle. Peace never comes from mastering every possible outcome. Peace begins when the heart accepts something that feels difficult at first. There are aspects of life that will always remain beyond human control. Circumstances will shift, plans will change, unexpected paths will appear. And when a person finally begins to accept this reality, something inside the mind starts to soften. The tension of control begins to loosen. The heart begins to consider a different possibility. What if the weight you have been carrying was never meant to be yours? What if the search for control has been hiding a deeper invitation? Because when the mind finally becomes tired of trying to control everything, it often arrives at a quiet and sacred moment. The moment the soul stops fighting. There comes a moment in many lives when the mind simply grows tired of resisting everything, tired of trying to predict every outcome, tired of carrying every responsibility as if the future depended entirely on personal strength. It is not a dramatic moment. It does not arrive with noise or announcement. It arrives quietly, almost like a deep breath after a long struggle. At first, the person may not even recognize what is happening. They simply feel that the constant effort to control life is no longer sustainable. The thoughts that once raced endlessly begin to slow down. The mind starts to realize that forcing solutions has not created peace. It has only created more tension. This moment can feel strange because it challenges something the world constantly teaches. The world often says that strength means pushing harder, thinking faster, planning further ahead. Yet the heart begins to sense that true strength may look very different. It may begin with something much simpler: the courage to stop fighting what cannot be controlled. When the soul reaches this point, silence becomes meaningful. Instead of filling every quiet moment with worry, the mind begins to observe its own exhaustion. The person notices how long they have been carrying invisible pressure, how many nights they have tried to solve tomorrow's problems before tomorrow even arrives. In this quiet awareness, a subtle shift begins to take place. The heart becomes honest about its limits. Human beings are capable of many things. They can work hard, make wise decisions, support others, and overcome difficulties. But there is one thing the human mind cannot do. It cannot control the entire path of life. The future remains beyond our reach. Outcomes remain uncertain. Circumstances move in ways that no amount of planning can fully guarantee. Recognizing this truth does not weaken the soul. It actually frees it. Because the moment the soul stops fighting the illusion of total control, space begins to open within the heart. Space for something deeper than anxiety. Space for something more stable than endless thinking. This is the moment when many people begin to rediscover faith. Not faith as a vague idea, but faith as a living relationship with God. Faith that acknowledges a simple and powerful reality. The future does not rest in human hands alone. There is a shepherd who sees the path beyond what we can see. When this awareness begins to settle into the heart, the mind no longer needs to fight every uncertainty. It begins to listen. It begins to notice that peace does not always arrive through solutions. Sometimes it arrives through trust. And this is where the ancient words of Scripture begin to speak with new clarity, because long before modern anxieties existed, there was a man who understood what it meant to face uncertainty, danger, and responsibility. In the middle of those challenges, he wrote a prayer that continues to guide restless hearts today. Those words are found in Psalm 23. Why Psalm 23 was written for moments like this? There is a reason why certain words in Scripture continue to speak to people across centuries. Civilizations change. Technology advances. The world moves faster than ever before. Yet the human heart still struggles with the same questions it always has. How do I find peace when life feels uncertain? How do I move forward when fear tries to control my thoughts? How do I rest when my mind refuses to stop worrying about tomorrow? Psalm 23 speaks directly into that struggle. These words were written long before the pressures of modern life existed, yet they address the deepest anxieties of the human soul with remarkable clarity. The man who wrote this psalm, David, understood what it meant to live with uncertainty. His life was not peaceful or predictable. He faced danger, responsibility, loss, and moments when his future was far from secure. Yet in the middle of those realities, David did not write a strategy for controlling life. He wrote a declaration of trust. Psalm 23 begins with a sentence that changes how everything else is understood. The Lord is my shepherd. At first glance, these words appear simple, but the image they carry is powerful. A shepherd guides sheep through terrain they cannot understand on their own. The sheep do not see the entire landscape. They do not know where the safe paths are or where the dangers might be hidden. The shepherd sees what they cannot see. He leads them, protects them, and provides what they need to continue moving forward. When David described God as a shepherd, he was revealing something essential about the nature of peace. Peace does not come from knowing every detail about the future. Peace comes from knowing who is guiding you through the future. Many anxious thoughts are rooted in the belief that we must understand everything in order to feel safe. The mind keeps searching for answers because it believes that certainty will remove fear. But Psalm 23 offers a different perspective. Safety does not come from having complete knowledge. It comes from trusting the one who already sees the entire path. This is why these words have comforted people during some of the most difficult moments of their lives. People have whispered Psalm 23 in hospital rooms when uncertainty filled the air. They have spoken these words during nights when sleep would not come. They have returned to this psalm when fear tried to convince them that they were alone. Each time, the same truth rises from the words. You are not walking through life by yourself. There is a shepherd who watches over your path. A shepherd who sees what you cannot see. A shepherd who leads even when the road ahead feels unclear. When the heart begins to understand this, something inside the mind starts to change. The pressure to control every outcome begins to loosen. The restless search for certainty begins to quiet down. And slowly, the soul begins to adopt a different way of seeing life. The shepherd mindset. When the mind begins to understand the meaning behind the words, "The Lord is my shepherd," something deeper starts to change within the heart. The way a person interprets life begins to shift. Problems may still exist, uncertainties may still appear, yet the inner posture toward those challenges becomes different. Most anxious thoughts are born from the belief that everything depends on us. The mind quietly carries the responsibility of protecting the future, solving every difficulty, and preventing every possible failure. Under this belief, life begins to feel like a constant battle that must be managed alone. The image of the shepherd dismantles that belief. A shepherd does not abandon the path halfway through the journey. He walks with the flock through open fields and through narrow valleys. He watches for danger long before the sheep become aware of it. He leads toward places of safety and provision, even when the sheep cannot yet see what lies ahead. When David wrote Psalm 23, he was not describing a distant God who observes life from afar. He was describing a God who walks with his people through the terrain of life itself, a God who guides through seasons of abundance and seasons of difficulty. Adopting what we might call the shepherd mindset begins with accepting this truth. Life is not meant to be navigated alone. The believer is not abandoned in the middle of uncertainty, forced to rely solely on personal strength. This realization changes how fear is interpreted. When a person believes they are alone, every challenge feels larger. Every uncertainty feels threatening. The mind becomes responsible for creating solutions to problems it cannot fully understand. Anxiety grows because the heart believes that survival depends entirely on personal effort. But when the heart begins to see life through the shepherd mindset, the same circumstances appear different. The presence of uncertainty no longer means abandonment. It simply means that the path ahead has not yet been revealed. The shepherd still sees it. This understanding creates a quiet form of courage. Not the loud confidence that comes from controlling every situation, but the steady confidence that comes from trust. The believer begins to walk forward with the awareness that guidance is already present, even when the direction is not yet visible. This mindset does not remove effort or responsibility. People still make decisions. They still work, care for others, and face challenges with wisdom. But the weight of ultimate control is no longer carried on human shoulders. Instead of trying to dominate the future, the heart learns to follow. And once the heart begins to follow, another virtue quietly begins to grow: the discipline of trust. Trust is often misunderstood. Many people imagine it as a feeling that appears when life becomes calm. They believe trust is something that comes naturally once circumstances become stable and predictable. Yet the truth is the opposite. Trust rarely begins when life feels easy. It begins precisely when certainty disappears. The heart learns trust when it reaches the limits of its own control. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. The mind is used to analyzing situations, calculating outcomes, and trying to prevent difficulties before they appear. It prefers clarity. It prefers control. When those things are absent, the instinct is to resist the uncertainty. But Psalm 23 reveals something deeper. Trust is not passive. It is a discipline of the soul. Just as the body grows stronger through repeated movement, the soul grows stronger through repeated trust. Each moment when a person chooses faith over fear becomes a quiet act of courage. Each decision to believe that God is guiding the path, even when the path is unclear, becomes a step toward inner strength. This discipline does not mean ignoring reality. Life still presents real challenges. Responsibilities still exist. Decisions still require wisdom and attention. Trust does not eliminate effort. What it changes is the foundation beneath that effort. Instead of acting from panic, the heart begins to act from confidence. Instead of rushing ahead in fear of what might happen, the mind begins to move forward with calm clarity. The believer understands that while human responsibility is real, ultimate control does not belong to us. That understanding brings relief. Much of the anxiety people carry comes from assuming that the outcome of every situation rests entirely on their shoulders. They feel that if they miss something, everything could collapse. If they fail to anticipate a problem, the consequences will be irreversible. Trust dismantles that pressure. When a person chooses to trust God's guidance, they acknowledge something powerful. God sees the path farther than we can see it. God understands circumstances beyond what the human mind can calculate. God's wisdom operates beyond the limits of human foresight. This realization does not remove uncertainty from life, but it transforms how uncertainty is experienced. Instead of becoming a source of constant fear, uncertainty becomes a space where faith is practiced. Little by little, the mind begins to relax its grip on the need for absolute control. The heart learns to take the next step without demanding to see the entire road ahead. And as this discipline grows, something else begins to emerge within the soul. A quiet place of rest. A place Psalm 23 describes with a powerful image. Still waters and the restless mind. There is a reason why Psalm 23 speaks about still waters when describing the care of the shepherd. Water in nature reflects the condition of the environment around it. When the wind is strong, the surface becomes restless. Waves appear. Movement replaces calm. But when the air grows quiet, the water becomes smooth and clear, reflecting the sky above it. The human mind behaves in a very similar way. When worries multiply and fears begin to take control of our thoughts, the mind becomes like troubled water. Thoughts collide with one another. Concerns about tomorrow interrupt the peace of today. The heart tries to rest, yet the mind continues moving, searching for answers, solutions, and certainty. Many people live with this inner turbulence for so long that they begin to believe it is normal. They assume that a restless mind is simply part of being responsible. They tell themselves that constant thinking is necessary to keep life from falling apart. Yet the words of Psalm 23 reveal a different truth. The shepherd leads beside still waters. This image carries a quiet message about the nature of peace. True rest is not created by solving every problem in advance. It emerges when the soul begins to trust the guidance of the shepherd more than the noise of anxious thoughts. Still waters represent a mind that is no longer fighting every uncertainty. A heart that has learned to breathe even when the future remains unclear. The calm does not come because life suddenly becomes predictable. It comes because the soul recognizes that it is not navigating life alone. Many people search for peace by trying to eliminate every possible difficulty. They believe that if circumstances become perfect, their minds will finally become calm. But life rarely unfolds that way. Challenges continue to appear. Unexpected events continue to reshape the path ahead. Psalm 23 offers a different path toward peace. Instead of waiting for life to become calm, the soul learns to become calm within life. This transformation begins when the heart starts to release the endless cycle of anxious anticipation. The mind stops rehearsing every possible problem and begins to return its attention to the present moment. The shepherd is guiding now. The shepherd is providing now. The shepherd is present even in the uncertainty. And when the mind slowly learns to rest in that truth, the surface of the soul begins to settle. Thoughts become clearer. Fear loses some of its urgency. The heart experiences something that once felt distant, quiet. This quiet does not mean the journey is over. It simply means the soul has found a place of stability within the journey. And as Psalm 23 continues, the path does not avoid difficulty. It moves toward a place that many people fear the most. Walking through the valley without fear. One of the most striking lines in Psalm 23 speaks directly to a reality every human being eventually faces. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. These words do not pretend that life will avoid dark valleys. They acknowledge something deeper. Every life will encounter seasons where the road becomes difficult, uncertain, and heavy. The valley represents those moments when circumstances feel overwhelming. It may be a season of loss, a period of confusion, or a time when the future appears clouded with uncertainty. The mind naturally reacts to these moments with fear. Fear asks questions that seem impossible to answer. What will happen next? How long will this last? Will things ever become peaceful again? Fear grows strongest when the mind believes it is alone in the valley. That is why the next words in Psalm 23 are so important. For you are with me. The psalm does not promise that valleys will disappear. It promises something far more powerful. The presence of God remains even when the landscape becomes dark. This changes the meaning of the valley entirely. A valley without guidance feels like a trap. A valley walked with the shepherd becomes a passage. The believer may not see the entire road ahead, but the presence of God transforms fear into endurance. Instead of being paralyzed by uncertainty, the soul learns to keep moving forward one step at a time. Courage is often misunderstood as the absence of fear. In reality, courage is the decision to walk even when fear tries to stop you. The valley becomes the place where that courage quietly grows. Each step forward becomes an act of faith. Each moment of trust becomes a declaration that fear does not have the final authority over the heart. Psalm 23 reveals that the shepherd does not guide the flock around every valley. Sometimes the path leads directly through it, but the promise remains the same. The shepherd never abandons the path. When the heart begins to believe this, something powerful happens inside the mind. Fear begins to lose its control. The valley may still be dark, but the soul understands that darkness is not the end of the journey. And this understanding leads to another surprising discovery. Strength does not always come from fighting harder. The strength hidden in surrender. Many people believe strength means holding on tighter, holding on to control, to plans, to outcomes they believe must happen in order for life to feel stable. When difficulty appears, the instinct is to push harder, think faster, and resist the possibility that things might unfold differently than expected. At first, this effort feels responsible. The mind tells itself that surrender would mean giving up, that releasing control would mean accepting defeat. So the heart continues to struggle, trying to force life back into a shape that feels safe. Yet something strange happens during this constant resistance. The more tightly the mind holds on to control, the more exhausted the soul becomes. Thoughts grow heavier, decisions become more difficult. Even small problems begin to feel overwhelming because the heart believes it must solve everything alone. This is where the wisdom of faith introduces a different perspective. Surrender is not defeat. It is the moment when the heart finally stops carrying a burden that was never meant to belong to it. Psalm 23 quietly teaches this lesson. The sheep do not guide themselves through dangerous terrain. They do not fight every threat with their own strength. They follow the shepherd. Their safety comes not from their own ability to control the landscape, but from trusting the one who understands the path. The same truth applies to the human soul. Surrender begins when a person recognizes that life contains forces larger than personal control. Time moves forward whether we approve of it or not. Circumstances change without asking permission. Outcomes develop in ways the human mind cannot always predict. Trying to dominate every one of those forces will eventually break the heart. But when the soul chooses surrender, something remarkable begins to happen. The endless tension inside the mind starts to loosen. The heart no longer carries the impossible responsibility of managing the entire future. Instead, it begins to trust the guidance of God. Surrender does not mean abandoning effort. The believer still works, still acts with wisdom, still makes decisions with care. But the outcome of every situation is no longer held with desperation. The heart releases the illusion that everything must unfold exactly according to human expectations. This release creates space for peace. For the first time in a long while, the mind begins to breathe. The soul discovers that letting go is not weakness. It is alignment with a deeper truth. God is capable of carrying what we cannot. And once the burden begins to lift, something long forgotten begins to return, restoring the soul. There are seasons in life when the soul becomes tired in ways that are difficult to explain. It is not always physical exhaustion. A person may sleep through the night and still wake up feeling heavy. The fatigue lives deeper than the body. It lives in the heart, in the mind, in the quiet place where emotions and thoughts meet. Psalm 23 speaks directly to that condition with a simple but profound statement. He restores my soul. These words reveal something many people forget when anxiety becomes constant. The soul can become worn down, but it can also be restored. Restoration means bringing something back to its original strength. It means renewing what has been drained by fear, worry, and emotional pressure. When the mind spends long periods anticipating problems, it begins to distort reality. Small concerns appear larger than they are. Uncertain situations feel like inevitable disasters. The heart becomes conditioned to expect difficulty before it even arrives. Over time, this mental pattern begins to affect how life is experienced. Joy becomes quieter. Gratitude becomes harder to notice. The future begins to appear like a series of obstacles waiting to happen. This is why restoration is necessary. Restoration begins when the soul reconnects with truth. Not the truth created by anxious thoughts, but the truth revealed through faith. The truth that God's presence remains steady even when circumstances feel unstable. The truth that the shepherd continues guiding even when the path becomes unclear. When the mind returns to these truths, something subtle begins to shift. The storm of thoughts slows down. The heart begins to release the assumption that every moment must be managed with tension. The soul starts to remember that peace does not come from constant control. It comes from trust. Psalm 23 does not describe restoration as a sudden miracle that erases every difficulty. Instead, it describes a process. The shepherd leads, the soul follows. With each step of trust, the mind grows calmer. With each moment of surrender, the heart grows lighter. Gradually, the inner world begins to reorganize itself. Fear loses its authority. Clarity replaces confusion. The soul begins to experience a quiet form of strength that does not depend on perfect circumstances. This restored perspective changes how challenges are faced. Problems still appear, but they no longer dominate the mind. Uncertainty still exists, but it no longer controls the heart. The soul becomes steady again. And once the soul begins to stand with renewed strength, the believer discovers something surprising within Psalm 23. Peace is possible even when enemies remain nearby. The table in the presence of fear. Psalm 23 reveals a scene that seems almost impossible at first glance. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. These words do not describe a world where every threat has disappeared. They describe something far more remarkable. Peace, appearing in the middle of unresolved tension. The human mind often believes that calm can only exist when problems are completely removed. People imagine that once difficulties disappear, once the future becomes predictable, once every threat is gone, then peace will finally arrive. Yet life rarely unfolds that way. Challenges remain part of the journey. Uncertainty continues to appear without warning. Psalm 23 introduces a different vision of peace. The table represents provision, dignity, and rest. It is the place where a person sits down without rushing, without fear, without the constant need to defend themselves. Yet this table is not placed in a distant place of safety. It is prepared in the presence of enemies. The meaning behind this image is profound. God does not always remove every difficulty immediately. Instead, he demonstrates that his presence is stronger than the threats surrounding his people. The believer is not required to wait until life becomes perfect before experiencing peace. Peace becomes possible even while challenges remain visible. This truth transforms how fear operates inside the mind. Fear often tries to convince the heart that danger must be eliminated before calm can exist. It whispers that safety requires total control over the environment. But the shepherd shows something different. The presence of God creates security that does not depend on controlling every external circumstance. When the believer begins to understand this, the mind slowly stops scanning the horizon for constant danger. The heart learns that stability does not come from eliminating every enemy, but from trusting the protection of the shepherd. The table becomes a symbol of divine assurance. It represents the moment when the soul stops living in survival mode. Instead of constantly preparing for disaster, the heart begins to receive what God is providing in the present moment. Food on the table, strength for today, grace sufficient for this step of the journey. Fear may still exist around the edges of life, but it no longer sits at the center of the soul. And when the heart begins to live with that confidence, Psalm 23 introduces another powerful image: the oil of strength and the overflowing cup. Psalm 23 continues with an image that speaks quietly but powerfully about the generosity of God. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. These words reveal something many anxious hearts struggle to believe. God does not merely help his people survive their difficulties. He strengthens them, honors them, and provides more grace than they expect. In the ancient world, oil was used to refresh, heal, and prepare someone for a task. When a guest arrived weary from travel, oil was placed on the head as a sign of honor and restoration. It was a gesture that said, "You are welcome here. You are valued. You are safe." David chose this image carefully because it reflects the way God cares for the soul that trusts him. Life often leaves the human spirit bruised and tired. Responsibilities drain energy. Disappointments leave marks on the heart. Seasons of uncertainty create emotional fatigue. When the mind remains trapped in anxiety for long periods of time, it begins to believe that life will always feel like a struggle for survival. Psalm 23 interrupts that belief. The shepherd does not guide his people through life with indifference. He restores their dignity. He strengthens their spirit. The oil represents a quiet renewal that reaches deeper than circumstances. It reminds the believer that God's care does not disappear during hardship. Then comes the image of the overflowing cup. Most people ask God for enough strength to get through the day, enough clarity to solve the next problem, enough peace to calm the next worry. But the shepherd often provides more than what the anxious mind expects. The cup does not merely fill, it overflows. This overflow does not mean life becomes perfect. Challenges still appear, valleys still exist, and uncertainty remains part of the journey. Yet something inside the soul begins to change. Instead of seeing life through the lens of scarcity, the believer begins to notice signs of grace that were previously overlooked. A moment of unexpected peace in the middle of a stressful day. A conversation that brings encouragement at the right time. Strength that appears exactly when the heart thought it had nothing left to give. These moments are small reflections of the overflowing cup. They remind the believer that God's provision is not limited to what the human mind anticipates. Even in seasons of difficulty, grace continues to flow. And when the soul begins to notice this steady generosity, its perspective slowly expands beyond the present moment. The heart begins to see life through a wider horizon. The long view of faith. One of the greatest sources of anxiety is the narrowness of our perspective. The human mind tends to focus intensely on the present moment, especially when that moment feels uncertain. A problem that appears today begins to dominate every thought. A challenge that has not yet been resolved starts to look permanent. The heart quietly assumes that the difficulty in front of it will define the entire future. Psalm 23 invites the soul to step beyond that narrow view. Near the end of the psalm, David writes words that shift the horizon of the heart. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." This statement does not come from someone whose life was free from hardship. David knew conflict, betrayal, danger, and loss. Yet he learned something through those experiences that anxious minds often forget. Life is not defined by a single moment. When fear dominates the mind, it tries to convince the heart that the current difficulty is the final chapter of the story. It whispers that the present struggle will continue forever. But faith expands the timeline. Faith remembers that God's guidance does not stop at the next obstacle. Goodness and mercy follow the believer across the entire journey. The image is powerful. Instead of running away from danger while hoping goodness might appear somewhere in the future, the believer is described as someone who is being followed by goodness itself. Mercy does not appear occasionally. It accompanies every step of the path. This perspective changes how uncertainty is experienced. The mind no longer interprets every challenge as evidence that life is falling apart. Instead, the believer begins to trust that even the difficult moments are part of a larger story that God continues to shape. Faith does not eliminate the unknown. It simply refuses to allow the unknown to dominate the heart. When the soul adopts this long view, patience becomes possible. The believer understands that today's struggle does not cancel tomorrow's grace. Temporary valleys do not erase the presence of the shepherd. The story is still unfolding, and God is still writing its direction. This realization introduces a quiet confidence that anxious thinking cannot produce. The mind begins to rest in the understanding that goodness and mercy are not distant hopes. They are faithful companions moving alongside every step of life. And when the heart begins to see life through that wider horizon, something else begins to happen inside the soul. The chaos of anxious thoughts slowly gives way to inner order. The inner order that replaces chaos. An anxious mind often feels like a room filled with noise. Thoughts collide with one another. Worries about tomorrow interrupt the peace of today. Memories from the past return without invitation. The heart tries to focus on what truly matters, yet the mind continues wandering through a maze of possibilities and fears. Over time, this mental noise begins to shape how a person experiences life. Even when nothing urgent is happening, the mind remains alert, scanning for problems that might appear. The soul lives in a constant state of preparation, as if danger could arrive at any moment. Peace becomes rare because the inner world never truly settles. Psalm 23 reveals that the work of the shepherd does not only guide the believer through external circumstances, it also reshapes the inner life. When the heart begins to trust God's presence, the structure of the mind gradually changes. Fear no longer occupies the center of attention. Instead of reacting to every uncertain thought, the believer begins to recognize that many worries are simply echoes of a restless imagination. Faith introduces order where chaos once ruled. This order does not come from suppressing thoughts or pretending that challenges do not exist. It comes from aligning the mind with truth. The truth that the shepherd is guiding. The truth that the path of life is not random. The truth that the soul is not abandoned in the middle of uncertainty. As these truths settle into the heart, the mind begins to reorganize itself. Thoughts that once demanded immediate attention lose their urgency. Questions about the future no longer feel like emergencies. The believer starts to approach life with clarity rather than panic. This transformation happens quietly, often without dramatic moments. One day the person realizes that their thoughts are calmer than they used to be. Situations that once created immediate anxiety are now approached with patience. The mind no longer jumps to the worst possible outcome. This is the inner order that replaces chaos. The soul learns to stand firm even when circumstances shift. External events may still change without warning, but the heart becomes anchored in something deeper than circumstances. Trust replaces suspicion. Patience replaces urgency. Faith replaces the constant demand for control. This inner alignment becomes the foundation for lasting peace. And once the heart experiences this new stability, one final realization emerges. Peace is not something that accidentally appears when life becomes perfect. Peace is a decision the soul must make. The decision to walk in peace. After everything the heart has discovered along this journey, one truth remains clear. Peace is not something that simply arrives when life becomes easy. It is not the reward for solving every problem or predicting every outcome. Peace begins with a decision. Every person eventually faces a moment when they must choose how they will walk through the uncertainties of life. The circumstances around them may remain unpredictable. Responsibilities will still exist. New challenges will continue to appear. The world will not suddenly reorganize itself to remove every difficulty. But the soul still holds a powerful freedom. The freedom to decide where it will place its trust. Psalm 23 ends with a declaration that reflects this decision. "And I will dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life." These words are not simply a statement about the future. They reveal a commitment of the heart, a commitment to live under the guidance of God rather than under the pressure of fear. This decision changes how life is faced. The anxious mind waits for circumstances to change before it allows itself to feel calm. It tells itself that peace will come later, once everything becomes safe and predictable. But the soul that trusts the shepherd understands something deeper. Circumstances may continue to move in uncertain ways, yet the heart can still stand in peace. This peace is not fragile. It does not depend on the absence of difficulty. It comes from the quiet certainty that the shepherd is guiding every step of the journey. When a person chooses this path, they no longer allow fear to dictate the direction of their thoughts. They refuse to give anxiety the authority to control their inner world. Instead, they return again and again to the same truth. God is present. God is guiding. God is faithful. This does not mean that worries will never appear again. Human thoughts still wander. Concerns still arise. But the difference is that the believer no longer surrenders the entire mind to those fears. The soul remembers the shepherd, and that remembrance becomes the anchor of the heart. From this point forward, peace is no longer something the person waits for. It becomes something they practice, a daily decision to trust, a daily refusal to allow uncertainty to dominate the mind, a daily return to the quiet confidence that the shepherd continues leading the path. Life will continue moving forward. New valleys will appear, and new open fields will follow them. But the person who chooses this path walks with a different posture. Their mind becomes clear. Their heart becomes steady. Their steps become calm. Because they have discovered a truth that anxious thoughts cannot erase. Peace does not belong to circumstances. Peace belongs to the soul that chooses to trust God. End.